2019 meeting of the Palo Alto Architecture Review Board. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, good morning. Chair Balte, please.
Present.
Vice Chair Thompson.
Present.
Board Member Liu.
Present.
And Board Member Hirsch. All present. Thank you.
Okay, the first item on our agenda is oral communications. If we have any information from the public, I don't see any speaker cards, so we'll move on. Next item is agenda changes, additions, and deletions. Where do we stand with that, Jody? Okay, there are no changes or anything like that. Next item is city official reports. Can you bring us through the schedule, Jody?
Yes, so the next hearing, we're actually just going to have two items at this point. The 788 San Antonio Road, which is a large mixed-use but more housing project, will be on the agenda, and then the 180 El Camino Real, the La Catane facade, will be on the agenda. So just two items there.
Can you enlighten us what this is, the Crown Castle Verizon cluster? That's a cell phone item. Is that really going to be back on our agenda?
I don't know at this point. Some of those will come to the ARB and some of them will not. And so I don't know the particulars of this exact project.
Okay, and then we're going to add on this item a final review of the draft letter to council?
Yes, thank you.
We
will add that report. I do have draft documents that I can hand out to the board so that you can be ready for that discussion.
Okay. I'd also like to be clear that I'd like to try to set the subcommittee appointments in advance enough that we can get it written into this schedule for next meeting, for example. So if you could be sure just to communicate with me in advance enough that we can make sure that's clear to the public who's going to be the subcommittee.
We don't have any subcommittees for the next hearing, but I think if we did, then maybe right now would be the time to make those assignments.
That'd be great. I think it'd be really beneficial to the public to know who the members are who are doing that. Okay. Then we come to our first order of business, which is action item number 2, a public hearing regarding 702 Clara Drive. It's a recommendation on applicant's request for approval of a major architecture review to allow the demolition of an existing 3,560 square foot 4-unit apartment building and construction of 3 detached single-family homes totaling 5,000 square feet. Staff, do you have a report for us?
Yes, thank you. Chair, Shelton Ossing, contract planner, and I have a presentation for you. The applicant's also here with their presentation. So the site is located at the intersection of Sutter Avenue and Clara Drive. The site is zoned RM20. The topography in the area is flat, and they're a mix of single-family and multifamily residential in the area. This is actually at the edge of the multifamily zoning district where it transitions into single-family across the street. So with the exception of this property behind, the adjacent properties are single-family residential. There's an existing 4-unit apartment building on the site there that would be demolished, and that was constructed in 1954. It's not deemed to be historic. And as mentioned, the proposal is to construct 3 detached dwelling units. It'll just maintain the one parcel. They're not splitting the parcel up, but I think the intention is to have a condominium map placed on the property in the future. The project was before the board this past February. There were a number of items that the board wanted to see looked at and revised, and those had to do with the floor to ceiling on the second floor is too tall. I think the preference was to have an 8-foot height. Also to provide good quality rendering from the street corner. That homes should be custom fit to the lot with high quality design materials. At the previous meeting, there was just one floor plan for each, the same floor plan used throughout the project. Maybe one was reversed with different architectural styles. There was a common open space along Sutter, and the revision proposed was to reduce that fence. The board thought that the porches were too shallow. The proposed also to take advantage of some of these open space areas more, so that would change the site plan around a little bit. Provide a better relationship with that streetscape. The site has streetscape along Sutter and Clara. Also, the property does have a utility easement on the rear of the property, which is opposite of the Sutter, so there are some constraints there. The board also thought that the trash receptacles on the side yards were not really working very well, in part because there were fences that were in between the buildings, and that Home B really didn't have much exterior space for the occupants compared to the other units. So just in summary, the project is a one lot for a future condominium subdivision, 3 two-story detached dwellings, in total of 5,000 square feet, which is pretty much maxing out the floor area ratio. There are 3 different floor plans this time around with similar types of architectural styles. Material board is on the dais there near Board Member Hirsch. The private open space areas are in the rear of the buildings. There's a common area that's along Sutter. The project is retaining the street trees, the mature redwood trees, as well as the maple trees along Clara. And in response to those revisions that I had mentioned in the previous slide, the second floor ceiling height is now at 8 feet. The front porch dimension on 2 of the units is increased by a foot. One of them still remains at 4 feet. The fences in between of the units were removed. However, that kind of now created another privacy type of issue. And the applicants actually, they do have a alternative that they want to present. And what we would recommend is putting those fences back, moving the condenser units that are in that area on the side yard to the rear, as well as the trash and any bicycle lockers. There was a balcony that was added to the rear of Home C, which actually provides some variety, and that was a good amenity, but there's another privacy issue there, so we recommended that they add another tree. The applicant has responded. They'll have an alternative plan to show you. And the other issue is that there's windows that are adjacent to the stairwells that are actually kind of big, and maybe we're just looking to see if there are any comments on privacy issues from the board on that. Regarding the zoning, there is a reduction of 1 dwelling unit overall, so that it is a kind of a concern, but there's not something in the code that would preclude them from doing that. The project is otherwise considered a multifamily unit project based on the amount of units. 3 is the threshold. The project is consistent with the development standards. They would have to pay an impact fee of $64,000. We have to amend our condition of approval to include that in there. So make that part of the motion when you're recommending. And otherwise, the project, we believe, is consistent with the findings. So it's just a site plan showing the layout is very similar as the last time. The open spaces are more evenly distributed. Still, Home B has probably a slightly smaller dimension there. There's still that shared driveway. We believe that helps with any types of conflicts with pedestrians or cyclists. There is potential to separate those two. Maybe one of the street trees would have to be removed or relocated or replanted. And then these are the renderings. The one on the left is the older rendering from February, and the one on the right is the newer one. And you see some subtle differences there. The applicant will describe more of those. And then again, here's some other elevations from the current that shows no landscaping, then with landscaping. And then some other comparisons from the past and the present here. And the applicant will go more through these, but we believe this is an improvement from what was done in the past. And then you kind of see here on the right, those large windows on the second floor. Those are the ones that are next to the stairwell that we wanted some direction on. Regarding the environmental determination, the project is considered an infill development surrounded by urban uses, and the project does not create any significant impacts pursuant to CEQA, so we believe it's categorically exempt. In conclusion, the project is consistent with the comprehensive plan, the zoning ordinance with the suggested modifications, and we recommend approval of the project to the director based on the findings and subject to the conditions, and also modifying that one condition regarding the affordable housing fee. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We'll have, Sheldon, we'll have questions in a second. I'd like to first ask my colleagues if we have any disclosures to make. I should have done that at the beginning. Rather than ask specifically if any of us have been to the site, I'll just remind everyone that a site visit is something we need to disclose. So Alex, any disclosures?
I visited the site this morning.
Ozma?
I have nothing to disclose.
David?
Previous time only.
Okay, I'd like to disclose I visited the site on Saturday, and I spent quite a bit of time talking with two of the tenants upstairs, the neighbor across the street, and one other neighbor walking around. I didn't learn anything that's not already in the staff report. Okay, questions of staff, anybody? Sheldon, could you explain for us the impact fee, what that's for?
Yeah, that is for the, when you're going down in the units, there's a certain percentage that then gets equated into the formula. And there's a formula that has to do with the average size of the units and a certain dollar amount that gets plugged in, and therefore you get that number.
So it's a fee the applicant pays to the city for the privilege of reducing the number of housing units.
So it's based upon the housing element program H1.2.1 talks about when a loss of rental housing occurs due to subdivision or condominium conversion, the project shall require 25% BMR units. After running that calculation, as Sheldon said, we come up with I think is it 0.75 of a unit, and fractions of units you're able to pay in lieu for.
And that impact goes into the Affordable Housing Fund?
Correct.
Thank you. Any other questions? David, go ahead.
Sheldon, on a zoning like this where you have these tight areas between buildings, and as you're suggesting that there should be some kind of fence separating them, is there any kind of a home ownership maintenance issue here that is possible, or do they have an agreement between owners? Obviously, an area like that will either be cleaned or not be cleaned, part of someone's responsibility or not part of it. But if it were kept open in some way and there were a home ownership relationship, maybe that would be a method of not having a fence between them and constricting it for mechanical uses or garbage or whatever, as long as there was a maintenance agreement. Is there such a thing?
Yeah, so typically with a condominium project, you would have the covenants and restrictions that gets built in, and it is exactly what we're talking about regarding maintenance. That's just a requirement of having a condominium project.
So it would be a possibility for them to create a home ownership, or could they be required to provide a home ownership, a maintenance agreement?
The maintenance would be required as part of the condominium map process.
Okay, applicant, do you have a presentation for us? You'll have 10 minutes to speak and 10 minutes to rebut any public testimony. Please tell us when you're ready.
Good morning, Board.
If I could ask you please to state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Gilbert Fernandez, Gilbert, Fernandez, Fernandez.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
So I'm here with my partner, Tony, and our land architect, Dakota. So just kind of a little information about me. I am diagnosed with epilepsy. So in the case that once occurred during my presentation, I'll have Tony come up and take over for me. So here's just a title page, kind of taking a look at the rendering, just as Sheldon has already described, and who's involved in our work. Now this is the site plan. We did take in consideration the comments from before, as far as if I go into parking. First, we did have them horizontal in the beginning, so we did reduce them back as far as the garage to home B and C, having the garage the covered parking space and also the uncovered parking space right in front as tandem. We did use the easement, which was also a comment that was stated in the previous to kind of utilize it. So we did utilize it as far as for another parking space for Home A. Another thing we did is there was a comment as far as not having the floor plan be the same on all three. So we did change the floor plan for all homes, including Home B and C, as far as they may look the same as first glance, but they are different. Other than that, we do have some pavers shown on this in the front as well as the side facing Sutter. I think our landscape architect can kind of go more into that. The pavers on the right side, which are close to the, within the drip line of the redwoods, they are going to be supervised by our arborists, so they may not interfere with any roots that are more than 4 inches in diameter to keep the redwoods there. We do have other trees as well, plants, and again, he can go more in depth in that if required. We did the issue with having before a fence in between each home was that there wasn't enough space to walk through, and so we removed the fences and we utilized that area for the trash, bicycle area, AC units for each home. Currently, you do have enough space to walk through, and any maintenance that's required for the machines, or the AC units. Again, but as far as going into what Sheldon said, will be an agreement as far as the maintenance of those areas. Other than that, we did keep the 2 curb cuts. There was a question as far as doing 3 separate ones. It was comment was pretty much not keeping, not having 3, as far as there would be too many on that street. So we did keep it as 2 in this design. There was a comment also on keeping 2 curb cuts. When I say curb cuts, it's as far as driveways, doing another curb cut and driveway on Sutter. That would be a little bit too much work to do on Sutter, and we believe it would be a lot more, it would impact the redwoods there as far as damaging any roots that would potentially harm them, and or not that, more concern is to keep them alive. So other than that, we can move forward to the next slide. Now in this area, well, on the area facing Sutter is let's see, that's a common, what was it called? Sorry. It was common area for all homes. We have which is the color is black. In the front, we have red, which is facing Clara, and that area is more of an open area used for all 3 homes. They kind of have their own spaces in front, and then on the rear, if you see the dash, which is in blue, those are all considered private. So as you can see here, we do have the existing, which is now the apartment complex, and what would we be proposing, which is reducing units, as we have a 4-unit complex, and we'll be reducing it to 3. So that would be kind of one point as well. And again, this is just kind of going over again what we had before and what we're proposing now. One of the comments was that the designs of the previous homes were a little bit too they're a little bit too how would you say that, they have they're too busy for the neighborhood. And so we were asked to simplify them. So we took, we looked around the neighborhood, see what is existing, and we added it to some of the homes in our proposed. So, for example, the bay windows, we did see some of the homes had that. We did stick with stucco, as in the previous designs we had some shingles, a lot of brick, tile. So we just simplified it, went back to stucco. Sorry, not back to stucco. We proposed that all 3 homes stay stucco, and we removed the brick, the tile, the columns, as well as we kept all proposed shingles, and we changed all the colors so that they look different, as well as the floor plan that we're proposing. As well as the colors, we kind of kept them pretty simple. Another comment was that the roof line or the roof planes were way too busy in the previous design, so we did simplify them as much as we could to accommodate the new floor plans. And this is kind of just a quick look at the surrounding neighborhood. You do have them in your packets, with A2 and A3. So again, we just went around the neighborhood, just kind of took what we saw and simplified them to our proposed. And as far as privacy, for the second floor, we did reduce them to 8 feet, as well as the first floor, which is 8. Previously, we did have 9 on the second floor, so just also to reduce the height of the overall homes, so that they're not kind of sticking out from the neighborhood. We do have, for the window design, we have high seals. That's mostly in the second floor, as to not look into the neighbors or homes A, B, and C to look into each other's areas. We do have those windows as obscure glass. The landscape also has additional trees while keeping the existing trees to kind of block the view from the areas that home A, B, and C would be otherwise looking into had there not be any of those. And this is more of kind of from the second floor what you'd be seeing from A, B, and C if there had been no additional landscape and trees that we're proposing. And that's also in your packet as well. And this is just more of just the simple materials that we're proposing now. Again, stucco, shingles, simple color on the windows and the doors as well. So just kind of picking neutral colors, just kind of like what we saw in the neighborhood. Again, these are the elevations for that same home, home A. As you can see on the sides, we do have the high seal. On the second floor windows, those will be obscured. And we are considering the stairwell window being obscured as well, or possibly even reduced if it helps with the proposed overall design. Actually, let me go back to that. If you can see on the bottom, we do have some high seals and as well in some areas. And the kind of the dark area is just a double door for furnaces. So just to, this is home B. Again, just to kind of show what kind of colors and materials we're going to have on home B. Again, on home B, you can kind of see we have, we're trying to keep the privacy and colors pretty neutral with shingles as well. And taking the divided light that we did see in one of the homes in the area. Again, home C, kind of, again, showing the colors, keeping the shingles. And on home C, we did do a balcony in the rear. There was a concern, again, about the balcony, so, but there's a slide talking about that. You can see the bay windows as well. Which, again, we did see in the neighborhood. And this is-
Excuse me, you're
yeah,
about a
sure.
minute over your limit. Could you
Sure.
finish it up, please?
Oh, yes. So this is just kind of some of the planning comments that that were given to us about as far as putting a fence in the center and having an issue with the balcony in the rear for Home C. So this is just an alternate plan to place the fences back in and moving some of the AC units and the trash area items in the bicycle areas. So this is just another option if it works. And this is just a rendering just to show the balcony is being blocked by an additional tree. And that's all I have for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions of the applicant? Ozma?
Yeah, I had a couple questions. In your material boards, you have light fixtures associated with each of the buildings. However, in the elevations, it's not really clear how many or where they are. Could you clarify where these light fixtures occur?
Oh, the light fixtures? The light fixture would be, I don't have them in the renderings, but they are going to be in the rear sliding door. There'll be 1 and 1 on each side. Garage will have 1 and 1. Photo, I forget the word. They turn off by light in the evening, and then some on the columns in the front.
So they'll be visible from
Yes.
Clara and from Sutter. And it's still kind of unclear how many you're using, or have you already placed all of them?
No, we already placed them. Yes, they should be in the electrical plan in your packet as well.
Okay.
The location at least.
And then of the windows that we've been seeing in these elevations, are they all operable? Like, can they all open, or are they fixed?
The ones, let me I need to verify that. I believe the ones on the sides, the smaller ones are fixed, and the operable ones are towards the rear.
So the small square ones are all fixed?
Yes.
Yeah. I see there are a few that you can kind of open, but, and are the big picture windows also fixed, or do they slide to the side?
The ones for the stairwells?
I'm looking at Home C front elevation where the 2 chairs would be. There's a window, there's kind of a big window behind that.
In the front? Is that we're referring to the front elevation of Home C?
Yeah.
Yeah, the one on the left of the front door will be a sliding door. I'm sorry, a sliding window.
A sliding window?
Yes.
Okay. That's all my questions.
Anyone else? David, Alex?
I have a quick question. For water heaters, are you using like tankless
But yeah,
water heaters that are facing outside or inside?
they will be facing outside.
Okay, and are those on the plans?
They should be in the electrical.
Okay, I didn't see them, but that doesn't mean I could have missed it.
Okay.
I'll take a look.
Yeah.
Another question.
David, go ahead.
Are you making some changes to the location of the AC units? Is that part of the discussion as we go forward here?
From the previous design, yes.
From what we're looking at here?
I'm sorry, say
So
that again?
between A and B, for example, there's 4 units, 2 of them are in a recess and 2 of them are against the building. Are you moving either one of those?
As far as moving them from the planning comments?
What?
This one here. This one here. Yes, so if we the only one would be Home A, is one would be moved to the rear left.
To the rear left, it
Yeah,
would be
to
moved.
the-
Those 2 that are on the face of the wall would be moved to the
Right.
left side of that building
Yeah,
A.
if we were to put a fence in the center, those AC units would
Have
block
to
that one.
move.
Yeah, they would move to the rear left of the Home A.
Okay. Are there any changes to the garbage locations that you have?
Yes, those will be moved as well. They'll be moved to the back corner of each area, each private area of each home.
Okay, so then between A and B, where's the location for the trash for Building B?
Home B is on the top left of its own area.
In the area between the buildings? Between A and B? Trash stays there?
Not in between. It would be in the top left corner of where the fencing would be for home B and C.
At the very rear of the property, is that what that little space says?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think you're referring here.
Yes, that would be the area there.
Can
Sorry,
you
I did
point
not
at
have
it?
this.
It's hopping around. We're back.
So for home C, it would be moved to here?
To the rear of the property.
Yeah. And then for home B, it would be here. And then for home A, it would not be to me moved because it's within the easement area.
So you're moving it to a location which is pretty far from the garbage truck, all the way in the back.
Yes. We pretty much didn't really have too many options as far as where to locate it. If we were to put the fences in the center. If we
Okay.
did move them to the front, they would interfere with the gas and electric.
Okay.
I'd like to come back to that in a second, but
Okay.
if we could, I'd like to have your landscape architect take 2 or 3 minutes to walk us through the proposed landscaping, if that's okay with the landscape architect and the applicant. I think the landscaping is important, and we haven't discussed it at all.
I don't have it. They have it in their packets, but it's pretty much.
And Dakota, if you could state and spell your name for the record, please.
Yeah, my name is Dakota Birch, D-A-K-O-T-A-H, B-E-R-T-S-C-H.
Thank you.
The primary changes to the landscape from the previous plan, as you recall previously, the main common use area was underneath the redwood trees along Sutter, and it was a mulched area. In this iteration, we've provided paver patios with larger ones along Clara, one larger one shared between A and B, and another one at the corner of home C. And so those would be the primary functional outdoor spaces for grilling or whatnot. And then additional areas underneath the redwoods that would be possibly used for 1 or 2 benches for a sort of private sitting area. There's screening from the street all along Sutter and Clara, where there's no driveway or existing street tree, provided by native shrubs, the manzanitas. The landscape is still predominantly native and drought tolerant, with a variety of shrubs and grasses and subshrubs such as irises and California fuchsia. Additionally, there's screening along the fences on the left side and along the rear of the properties with larger hedging shrubs. And each unit has a small no-mow lawn area in the backyard. And then along the driveways and entrances, there are, well, first I should say there are 6 new trees shown. One at the front of each house, a smaller redbud tree, and in the rear arbutus trees, one for each unit, and with more ornamental perennial plantings underneath them.
Thank you. Let me follow up on the landscaping question. I'm looking at a rendering from the corner of Clara and Sutter. I'd like to know if that landscaping is accurate to what you've designed.
I would say in terms of the placement of plants, it's fairly accurate, but visually not very accurate. I think the shrubs shown there look columnar, whereas my intention with the manzanitas would be that they would be more naturalistic and hedge-like.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for landscaping? At this point, we'll open the meeting to public testimony. Does any members of the public have anything to say? Do we have any speaker cards?
I don't have a card, I'm sorry.
Jody, do we need a card for her? Is that? Okay. If you could
Mine's Mimi
state,
Wolf.
if you'd state and spell your name for the record.
Mimi Wolf, MIMIWOLF, just like
Okay.
the animal that howls.
You'll have 3
Anyway,
minutes. Thank you.
I live on San Carlos Court behind Safeway over the next street over, and I walk along Sutter, Clara, almost every day. And there are, as you noted, apartments going from Clara to Middlefield all along that route. And so with all the multifamily units, this means there's many cars that during the day, those people go to work. But at the commute time, there is people cutting not only from Sutter and Clara, but I assume from Ross as well, to avoid lights and such, and to get to Middlefield, and then to Oregon. So during the commute time, people come around the corner at from Middlefield to Sutter at rapid speed, and I've seen many close calls. And so my concern is that this may provide more cars and increase the traffic at Sutter. One concern is how you can go from 4 units to 3, but my main concern is traffic. And I'm wondering why the city is not addressing the traffic around this area. And I know we have speed bumps on Ross. We've done a lot to improve Ross to slow traffic, but I'm thinking that this is causing Sutter and Clara to have more traffic to cut off from from between Sutter and Oregon, so people are going down Sutter to get to Middlefield more quickly. Yes. So I'm just concerned about the increase in drivers and traffic, and we aren't doing much to help with alternative transportation that should be more addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other public comments? With that, we'll close public testimony and bring it back to the board. Before we start a discussion, I wonder if we could get a clear explanation of the 2 alternatives regarding the fence between the buildings. Maybe Sheldon, are you able to walk us through that, or the applicant?
I think I just briefly, when I met with the applicants yesterday.
Excuse me 1 second. I've been reminded that the applicant has an opportunity to rebut the public testimony. You may speak to her comments if you wish.
Okay, so if I understand, it's mostly about traffic. Just as she also mentioned, we're going from 4 to 3 units. I mean, if we were to talk about a unit, it would typically hold a husband and wife both having their own car. So I think that's one point that I can make, that we would be reducing from, let's say, 8 cars to 6. Currently, we have Just a quick second point. The apartment complex now has the 4, but only has a 3 covered car carport in the rear. So you would see the second, whoever lives in the 4th unit would be pretty much parking on the street. So other than that that would be my only.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. I still would like to get an understanding of the options with or without the fence between units A and B and C, vis-a-vis the negative changes to privacy and functionality of trash AC condensers. Sheldon, is that best for you to address or the applicant?
Well, let me just start off at least with the context, and I think the details can be followed up with Mr. Fernandez. So the issue is that the homes, they have the minimum amount required space between them for building, and fire access and egress, and having
Fence is there,
what's a
if the fence is between them.
and so if you don't have a fence there, then the issue is having the windows placements and people kind of being able to look to each other, or if you're in that area and you're walking through, you may be able to see in through the different units. That space in between is really not considered open space. It's really a utility area to walk through for maintenance purposes. And in this case, they wanted to put some AC condensers there. A couple of the units, AC condensers are actually tucked under the building a little bit. And one of the placements would have them place it between the buildings. You have the trash. As you know, trash bins have a certain dimension to them. And then the bike lockers as well. So having all that in that area with the fences, it just doesn't work. And so our suggestion is to move some of those items out of that area into the rear. And that's where I think maybe we could have some discussion about. But it does appear in the plans that there is pavement areas, pavers, that would make it easier for the movement of those bins as well as the bicycles. So that does help a bit. But then with that, I'll kind of leave it to the applicant to describe further.
To the applicant, then, do you have a preference or a feeling, or can you guide us through this, whether you prefer to have a fence or deal with privacy impacts differently?
Just as kind of I mentioned before, most of the areas if you can see in the elevations here, most of the windows are high. The ones that are lower in that area, those square ones, that's the garage. So don't think that's a kind of privacy concern. We did some in the living room, in the dining area. You can also see those kind of transom-looking windows. Those are more on the high side, high sill, and the bottom ones are the larger ones are kind of in the living room. Now I know there's that's kind of a common area where most families would be. We are considering making those obscure glass. As far as that, if we go back to the site, having them in the center, just kind of how we mentioned, it's more maintenance. It was also a concern in the last ARB that it's way too tight for someone to walk through, and that's why we remove them. And we do once we remove them, we did kind of feel like it was kind of a larger space for the homes to kind of be separated and almost feel like they kind of have their own privacy instead of just having a fence in the center. But other than that, yes, our current proposed without fencing, I believe we would prefer.
So I'm unclear what your preference is. These are fences between your clients or tenants, and it's their utility. Would you prefer to have the fences or not have the fences?
Not have the fences.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah. So the plan that we're looking at on the screen is not the same plan in our drawings, right?
Right.
And I just want to clarify what we're talking about here, because, in our plan I see something older, but are we talking about a fence that's kind of going all the way through between each building, that is the proposal right now? Or is the proposal not to have the fence? and just have a change in paving between?
So
I'll take this one, Gil. So actually, in your packet, there are conditions of approval that would require them to put the fences in. So this is in response to that. They're kind of getting you some early views of what that would look like.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So in the packet, we have conditions of approval to address these issues that we brought up today regarding the privacy, to include the fence down the middle of these units. And so a lot of times you wouldn't be able to see sort of a drawing of that at the meeting, but they took the time to do that to show you that today.
Okay, so the plan we're looking at is showing the fence going all the way. And the plan that we have in our packet is showing that open space in between. And the fence is really just from the back of the building to the property line beyond.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and which condition of approval is it?
Number 8.
You okay with that, Alex?
No, but we can talk about that.
Okay. David, why don't you start us off with your feelings about the project?
First place, I think it's a big improvement over the last submission. I like the fact that the houses kind of open onto the street, that they move back towards the corner, kind of an inviting gesture towards the street, and that the masses pull forward as you move into the street. I like the fact that you've changed the style of the houses to be different, each one of them. I think they're not so exciting as pieces of architecture, but they're fairly consistent in the way you've approached them, and it's an improvement. I mean, my major concern here is the site planning in this very area that's between the buildings. Not quite sure where we end up with zoning that allows for that kind of 7.5-foot distance between buildings and creates problems with windows having to be obscured and et cetera. It just doesn't seem all that logical to me when other zones have 6-foot side yards minimum, you know, so that there's a bigger space definitely between houses. And even there are always questions about privacy and windows that face each other. But I think that the issues that need to be addressed here are the ones we've pretty much raised already about the air conditioning, which maybe you have solved, and the maintenance of those machines, but that the garbage locations and the bicycle locations somehow ought to be very convenient to the people who are using those houses, and to be able to be taken to the street quite easily. Locating them in the backyard doesn't seem sensible to me at all. So how to treat that area between buildings? You know, you've been showing it as a paved path kind of down the middle. I don't know why it couldn't be a paved area between buildings so that it would handle issues like garbage needs to be cleaned and areas that are going to get dirty, and so that the whole front is recessed up to a point where then it becomes maybe private, that it's a more public open, but not necessarily unfenced. Still, it could be fenced and not be garbage cans in the front yard, but would allow you to locate the garbage between the buildings. That doesn't apply so much in A, but definitely between B and C. And the same thing is true of the bicycles, why they should be so remote in the back of the house. They could, if you have enough of a recess there, you could locate them. Admittedly, I'd rather see a greater distance between the buildings so that each one of those could feel private, and then you still have issues of maintenance. Now, that's something I think you should work out with the owners in the future and write it into their lease in some way, if that, or whatever, however your arrangement is going to be. But I think there needs to be some official arrangement that takes care of those particular issues between owners when they're so close to each other. Everybody else who has a private house on a larger piece of land takes care of their own and is responsible for it. But there's a little overlap here if you have a single door and you need access to that area all the way through. But those are simple, could be a sort of a simple answer physically to get them in that location. I'm kind of at a loss with how this landscaping is really working. We have a outside the fence area that's all paved and facing the street, and I'm not sure who that belongs to. Is it a community gesture? Could you get to it from the community? Is it a private gesture? How do you use it? What's the function of all of the paved areas along Sutter? Will anybody in this group decide to use it, or are they going to use their backyards? Why would they ever use it? Seems to me there's an opportunity there to make a sort of a public gesture with something very public, and it's beyond a fence line, you know. And maybe that would be a very nice thing for the whole cul-de-sac there to come out and participate in. I'm not sure if that could work, and then there's who's responsible for it, who cleans up for that. Maybe that has to be something discussed with the whole street. I don't know how it would be done, but it is kind of semi-private, semi-public, open trees, etc., inviting people to come step over the landscape and walk in there and become a part of it. So it's confusing to me how it is possible to use that. Other issues? Let me look for a moment. Well, of course, the deck on Unit B is still too small. I mean, you enlarged, I think, deck C so that it's a 5-foot dimension. Is that correct? In front, the deck on building C?
Let's see. Let me see. The porch on the first floor is what you're referring to?
The deck in the front. The depth of the deck in the front of building C.
Yes, where the entrance is.
So what about the deck in B?
Are you referring to the porch in the front?
There's a front deck and furniture on
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah, that is the one that remains at 4 feet.
It's 4 feet.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much what it was. So it hasn't been increased any.
Before, I believe we had it 3.
So I'm just saying that two decks should be made useful. It's a kind of a thing, a Palo Alto item. Everybody has decks, or most everybody seems to have houses that are of a certain era. And if that's what you're saying there, that's a kind of a socializing thing and people are out there. So then if you think about that, those are decks that kind of are open to the neighborhood, and usually they are. But the landscaping here is unbelievably dense and private. And I don't think that's a nice thing in a neighborhood socially, to make a landscaping so dense that you sort of cut out the entire neighborhood. It's just ringed with trees front and back. I can understand maybe with an apartment house behind how you want to sort of block off some of that. But this is a neighborhood, and it ought to feel like a neighborhood, and I don't think it does with the landscaping at all. Those are my major concerns. So I will leave it up to you to ask how you could, or answer how you could address some of those issues.
Thank you, David. Alex?
Great, thank you for your revisions. I think they generally look good. I do have several concerns, although generally I'm supportive of the project. Okay, so with regard to this, the site planning And the issue that the staff has brought up about the fence, the side yard fences, I think I prefer what you have in your drawings, and I don't support the staff alternative. So, you know, I think in Palo Alto, we're used to 6-foot side yard setbacks for private houses. But if you go to other parts of the country, say if you go to like Newport Beach, or even say like, I lived in St. Louis for a while. So in Newport Beach, it's just a 3-foot side yard. And what you get with this 3-foot side yard is nothing. So you have a fence, and there's no room for any landscaping at all, and it's just nothing. It's just the fence, and it's really not very attractive. In some parts of St. Louis, in the nicer neighborhoods, they actually don't allow any fences at all in the side yards, but generally they have larger lots. And it actually looks better. Also, I would say in the new developments here around the Bay Area, I think we're pretty used to narrow side yards with 0 lot lines. And generally it's like a condominium, and so one neighbor gets to landscape the side yard, and which is what I think they're trying to do here. And I think it's actually better. Like, they're not showing any landscaping currently in the side yards, but they could. If you have 6 or 7 feet or 8 feet, you can get the path and some landscaping in there. And so I think that's actually better. And then the privacy issues can be mitigated with clear story windows and obscure glass and window shading. On the architecture, and let me just stay with landscaping then for a minute. I do have a concern about the staff recommendation about adding one more tree in the backyard, like the madrone trees. So they're showing them at maybe like a 10-year growth, but really, ultimately, they would be twice the size that's shown on the plans. And I'm thinking, my general thought is that 3 is enough if they're actually at a mature size. I drew them out at full size on my set of plans, and I think that's enough. I do understand the balcony issue with regard to privacy in the apartment building, and I did look at the site again today, and I did see that the apartment building has no landscaping whatsoever. Also on landscaping, I am concerned about Unit A, the front yard, that it really has too much paving between the driveway and the paver area, that it may be just over too much. So I maybe ask for a reconsideration of the paved patio area in the front yard of Unit A. On the architecture, I have 3 concerns, four concerns. One is you're not showing any of the roof ventilation for the hip roofs, and it's really hard to get all the ventilation to work on a hip roof unless you add like dormer vents. So I think maybe ideally it would be great if something is shown. It doesn't have to come, for me it could be to a subcommittee. Also, you're not showing any downspouts. Anytime you break a roof, you're adding a downspout. And we've typically required that on other comparable projects. And again, that could go to the subcommittee. Unit B, the front porch, which has not changed. The depth has not changed. I was scaling it at less than 4 feet, like maybe like 3'9" or something. And I think that's actually too narrow. I'm willing to accept a narrower porch if you can access it directly, like front on. And then you're showing it only coming in through the side. And you've got landscaping in front of it. And I don't think that works. So again, I think that's a revision that could go to the subcommittee. Also in Unit B, you have like the laundry room is cantilevered over the front of the house, and I'm thinking that that's going to look like a mistake. I will let my other board members weigh in on that. So I have some concerns about that. And the staff asked for comments on the stair the large picture windows at the staircases, about privacy with regards to those. And I think in previous comparable projects, we've required either obscure glazing or have a windowsill that's high enough that you can't really look down into the neighbor's property. And I think that that's an issue for me on Unit A. I'm not so worried about it on the other units. So that is all of my comments. And I will let you follow up.
Thank you, Alex. Ozma?
Thank you. Thanks for your updated revisions, and thank you to my fellow board members for their insightful insight. I do agree with the comments about the roof that board member Liu made about the vents and the downspouts. Also, looking at the material board, I'm concerned that the roof for House A is too dark. Will probably make the house pretty hot, unless there's something about the solar reflective index in there that I can't see, but that information's not available to me. So at the moment, roof A's roof is just way too dark, and that's a problem. The other two seem like they should be okay in terms of reflectance, but that information would be really helpful. So if we do go to subcommittee, I'd like to see that. With the site plan and the fencing, I think it would have been really helpful to see what we have on our screen kind of bigger. There's a lot of stuff I was looking for. It's a little hard to find at that scale. Initially, before I was hearing my board members' feedback, I actually was preferring this option with the fence all the way down and the bike sort of tucked away. I've had my bike stolen twice out of my backyard, so it's kind of nice that that bike storage is tucked away. And I understand that there's no landscaping in between because I presume it's not really going to live because of the amount of shading. So I kind of thought the fence was a nice way to break that up, given that landscaping doesn't really have a chance between there. But I also see the other side, that having more space can potentially have more opportunities for other things. So I could go either way on the fence in between. Landscaping notes, I agree with board member Liu about the paving in front of Home A. Home A does seem a bit deprived. It's a little upsetting that the rendering is not really true to what the landscaping design intent is. Kind of agree that when I looked at the rendering, it seemed that none of this looked native, and it looked a bit, I don't know, excessive. But if there was a better chance to get a better understanding of what that is. In general, I'm a big fan of densely landscaped areas. I think the world needs more plants in this world. So sort of not to totally contradict what board member Hirsch said, but I do like that there is a lot of landscaping on this site. I wish I just had a better idea of what that really would be in real life. And I also had another note that for the elevations, in the electrical plan, it sort of contradicts what's in the material board. It's showing that House B has the light that would be on House C in the material board. I'll just say that I prefer what's in the material board for House B to have the cylindrical light. And for House C to have, this other light that is a bit more decorative. The material board makes more sense in that way. Other than that, I can support this project. There's obviously a lot of stuff that would have to go to subcommittee that we'd have to keep track of. I wonder if it's enough to come back. Maybe it's not, but we'll kind of see what the board thinks. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ozma. Well, I'd like to chime in as well. And I think, less sanguine about the project. I really have an issue with the way you're treating the corner of Clara and Sutter and the way you've taken the 16-foot zone where the redwoods are and essentially completely divorced that, both from the people living in House C. There's just a wood fence 3 feet from the house, and there's really no visual or physical connection to that space. And then as I look at the landscaping plan, you've divorced that space from the public, too. You've done everything you can to landscape that away from the public. And what I think I see you trying to do is meet an open space requirement by putting public spaces there, or spaces tenants of the buildings are going to use. But as one member of the public said to me, that space will be nothing but a place for dogs to defecate. And that's just, I think that's true. I don't think that's a good use of that space. Either do as David suggested and make it genuinely public. I think you had started that way, and we had an issue with that as far as it just being not to the houses. Or reshape House C, put a French door, use that as their garden. It's a lovely space, and with land being at the premium it is in Palo Alto, it's really a shame not to take advantage of that. It's a significant amount of space, and as I can see, there's no restriction from you landscaping that to be an open side yard for the tenants and the occupants of House C, or somehow configuring it to be partially that and partially open space. But I just find it very bothersome that I see these corner renderings, and the building is not designed to be on the corner. It's still facing one street. The Sutter Street side is entirely just the side yard of a house. It could be flipped around and not have any change. And as I walk up and down Sutter, there's a myriad of lovely homes with real front yards facing that street. The next building up, the apartment building, has done a nice job landscaping their front yard as a public, beautiful space. It's full of grass and palms, and it creates a nice vista. And what you've done will just be sort of a forest, and I very much doubt anybody will go in there for a picnic or a barbecue. I don't believe the tenants of these buildings would go in there either. So I really have an issue with that space planning, and I think it takes a pretty good sized change on the design of the buildings and the use of the property to really make sense out of that. So I'm sorry, but I have a significant concern about the use of that space. Regarding the space between the buildings A and B and C, I do agree with Alex Liu ultimately that a 3-foot side yard is just a waste. It can't be landscaped. It can't be used in any way. It can't even be used functionally. If you put an air conditioning unit there or a trash bin there, then you can't get through. It doesn't work. It becomes a hazard in the event of an emergency. And yet that's exactly where the garbage can is going to be placed, where the bicycle will be stored. And so what we've done is let this way our zoning code is playing out create a real negative space. And I think maybe it was David alluded to a different idea of perhaps create half of the space as a 6-foot wide useful space for one of the houses or the other, address the privacy issues with the windows, as Alex was mentioning, with obscure glass or placement of the windows. And then in the back half of it, you could do the opposite for the other family, or maybe put a fence in part of it, but essentially be a little more creative. It's not all or nothing. You don't have to have either a fence down the middle or no fence. And I think both of those options aren't really good enough. So I don't support what staff is recommending, but I'd like to see more detail as to how you would address the privacy issues, which staff rightly brings to our attention. They're significant and real. How will they be addressed? And so I just think that needs more work as well. I would also like to just step through quickly. Staff very nicely provides us a list of our previous comments. And usually I read through the list and it's a series of checks. Aside from lowering the plate height, though, I just have a bunch of no's here. I don't think the rendering from the street is a good quality rendering. In fact, as your landscape architect pointed out, it's not accurate to the plants. Well, that's the whole point of seeing that, and I'm afraid it's important to make the effort to get it right. Like I just mentioned earlier, I don't think the homes are custom fit to the lots. What we're really asking for is not to just change the floor plan for the sake of changing the floor plan, but rather to address the varying conditions. I distinctly recall saying a corner lot is different than a mid lot. And the case where you have a corner lot, I don't see an architectural response to the building being on a corner, both functionally relating to that open space on the side and visually. What does it look like from the corner? I think you need to modify your landscaping so it sets off the building on the corner. You need to design the building to have, for example, the front porch could wrap around the corner. That's a beautiful effect of making it integrate to the corner, making it attractive to the public in the front street. The lower fence along Sutter Avenue, you've done the opposite with the landscaping. You've blocked it off. The front porch on Unit B is still the same. We didn't get any change on that. Taking advantage of the open space areas, I see you putting the air conditioning unit back in the open space on Unit C. I don't see much with Unit B. So I don't want to keep going through it, but I think it still needs more work. So I'm of the opinion that this needs to come back to us at best. I've heard, so those are my opinions about it. I've heard David and Alex both say they're thinking the building's going in the right direction. I don't know if we're.
I think I agree with, I think I'm in agreement with David. It's not great architecture. I guess I was thinking that it meets like the minimum standards, but I would support, if you want this to come back another time, I would actually support that. And I think the idea of like a corner porch and improving the corner, I think is very important. And that's something that I've done on like all of my other projects. So like, I think that that's like a critical thing. And I think that's something that we've always tried to do on other projects to try to enforce that. So I don't think that's really, I think that's acceptable. The only thing that I would push back is trying to make the landscaping along Sutter public. Like, I think that's just way out of bounds. I don't recall I don't recall any other project where we've asked for private property to be taken for public use. I think I think that's just way out there. But I don't disagree with you guys about the design of it. So if that needs to come back, then that's fine.
Any comments on that, David, or thoughts about?
Well, I accept both points of view. I think Alex has some good comments there. But I also accept your idea that you could wrap the backyard around for the Unit C and make it private. And I really like the idea of wrapping a porch around. I think that's an incredibly good idea here. If it's possible, it may change the shape of the building a little bit too, but make it a corner building. I definitely agree. It's a special building and needs to be addressed differently. I think the setback porch on the top floor helps a lot with that, but not enough yet. You need to do some more. And I'm still ambivalent about how you use the public areas, but maybe it somehow paving from the sidewalk to it and a little bit more, or relating it somehow to the sidewalk would kind of make it work better than to simply wall it off. I think the project could come back to committee, that there's a number of things that have been done that do improve it, but I think it's pretty clear that the areas between the buildings aren't working the way they are. I don't know if I agree with Alex that there's much to landscape there once you've built your buildings and you don't have much sunlight and it's really just diffused windows that are going to face each other. I think it's a zoning issue, really, not your issue. And if you've used all the zoning and it's acceptable to planning, then make it work functionally. So access to it for the fire department obviously has got to be pretty important. Moving the air conditioning, I think, is a significant improvement for that purpose as well. And maybe paving the whole thing. I don't see it as a useful space that really can be landscaped. But I do accept Peter's comments about the corner, absolutely. I think you need to create a better rendition of the landscaping with an idea to opening it up to the street. The way I suggested, it shouldn't be a wall in the front of that building, but should relate to the neighborhood. And one other issue that was mentioned a lot earlier but wasn't brought up again is the operable windows. You can't get by today without having a lot of operable windows, and this is a great climate for opening windows and not using your air conditioning. So I think you better take a very serious look at your kind of windows that you're providing here. And I feel that's really something Palo Alto wise, because I'm new here and I love the air. And I feel that it should be respected, and it's part of our observation of our energy requirements here as well. So I think that with those comments, I would say it could come back to committee.
If we can follow through on that Sutter Street 16-foot landscaping buffer, I think, David, when you said public, you weren't meaning they should make it like a public park, rather it should be visually more open to the public. Ozma, I heard you say the opposite, that it should be landscaped. Can you address that?
Yeah. I guess, maybe it's just because of the way that this is laid out. There's an air handling unit that's facing Sutter Avenue. It seemed like if they were going to leave it there, that you wouldn't want to advertise that to the whole street. And so in general, I think like a wall of green is actually really nice to look at if it's a nice wall of green. So I have no opposition with a densely landscaped area if it's still usable. I don't think that's a detriment to the area. In fact, I think it's a really nice thing.
If I recall, just across Sutter Street is a home with a dense green hedge up at the street. It also has a wonderful arched opening through it and another break that you can see through. And it does, I would say, meet both requirements in the sense that it is densely private landscaped space. But there's something about the opening through it that you see through. A pedestrian realizes that's somebody's front yard, and it's an attractive space. I'll maintain that that's the case because the home opens to that yard, and so they maintain and use that space. And I think that would meet what David and what Ozma are saying. Unfortunately, I don't think that's in the design in front of us right now. So I'm not saying to do that, but that's an example of where I think we're asking you to go with it. Do board members agree with that kind of comment?
Yeah.
I had actually put in my notes, put a gate on the side yard, but I didn't say it because I thought that was being too nitpicky, but I actually have it down here, so I think I agree with you.
Okay, well, I think at least three of us are looking to see this come back to us. Are you clear, Mr. Fernandez, as to what we're talking about here? Should we try to summarize some of our points? And
I wanted to ask about the fencing. Are you all in favor of fencing in the center? Is that what I'm understanding?
I think we're in favor of neither, and we're asking you to get a better solution. I think we believe that you'll be able to design something that clearly meets the privacy issues and allows for a wider side yard. My colleagues agree with that?
It sounded like we were not in favor of the fencing in front of us in this image.
Yeah, I think from a staff perspective, we understand that the 3-foot side yard is not what we're looking for. We can do 6-foot side yards, either, splitting it down the middle the opposite direction, or, not having a fence at all and only having that side yard for one house. If we do the side yard for one house, we would just have to frost the windows or do high sill windows, something of that degree. So I think we have enough direction, from a staff perspective, we have enough direction on the side yard.
Okay, and to the applicant, that would...
I do think we should summarize any other comments.
Yeah. So along the lines, the way you would accomplish that is by providing a detailed window schedule that would explain Board Member Thompson's concerns about operable windows and frosting and things like that. I'm afraid the drawings are just a little bit unclear on some of those details, and they're important. Does anybody want to try at a motion?
I'll give it a go.
Okay, Ozma, see what you can do. Maybe just make a list for us, and then we can...
So I saw Alex write a list over there, but so I'll give it a go anyway. So I'll move that we continue this project to a date uncertain addressing the concerns that we've discussed, which I'll try to summarize here, that the roof material for House A come back with a different material that has a higher solar reflective index, that the roofs in the elevations show vents and downspouts, and that the elevations show materiality and lighting, that the landscape be better communicated in a better rendering, so that we have a better understanding of how the landscape works, that the side yard on Sutter Avenue have a level of privacy that is also pleasing to see from the outside based off of what we've discussed earlier, that the side yards between the houses be revised. I need some help here.
Okay, the side yards need to both meet privacy concerns and functionality of trash and bicycle and AC locations.
Right. What board member Balte said. I'll stop there.
The less paving in front of Unit A?
Yes, that there be more landscaping in front of Unit A. That House C be sufficiently redesigned to address a corner unit layout so that it has opening or addresses both corners on Clara and Sutter. I don't
If you
remember
don't
the
say
tree in
these
the
things in
backyard.
detail, it doesn't happen.
I'll take a friendly amendment if someone wants to take over.
Before you do that, then, if that's the motion, we need it seconded, and then we can put amendments to it.
I think with the tree is not in the plans, right? And then the staff was recommending to add a tree. And I'm not opposed to adding a tree, but I think as it is, like, it's not in there? Or is there a condition of approval to add a tree?
Right, that was just something we had in
It's
our
just-
presentation.
Okay.
Oh, and that the applicant include the impact fee for affordable housing. Is there a second?
Okay, do we have a second for that motion?
I will second the motion.
Okay, the motion's seconded. Any amendments or changes? Okay.
No, I just wanted to weigh in on the last, on item number 7, which is the corner of House C. So I think, Board Member Walter, you were recommending a corner porch, and I think that's a good idea. And then I think I just wanted to comment that there is a redwood tree and a tree protection zone. So that there could be an issue, but they also have some flexibility on the placement of the house.
Absolutely.
So the previous design had that house moved forward towards Clara, and then there would be, if in that case, there would be more room to put a corner porch on there without impacting the redwood tree. So I think that's potentially a major, I think as you mentioned, that's a major design change. So I think in that kind of situation, it should come back to the board. I think that, and then I think on the motion, yeah, and then I think the motion is for it to come back to the board, right? Okay, so then I think that that's fine as it stands.
Okay, so the motion's made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, the motion passes 4-0. We'll take a 5-minute break for Sheldon to set up for the next meeting, next item. Thank you.
Thank you.
Number 3, 486 Hamilton Avenue. Request for a preliminary architecture review of a new 4-story mixed-use project, including 2,457 square feet of retail space, 2,049 square feet of office space, and 4 residential units. So, any disclosures on this project?
I visited the site yesterday, and I also researched the historic status of the building next door. And it is not, I researched it on the Palo Alto Stanford Heritage website, and it's listed as potentially eligible, but it's not on the state register, but it's not historic.
So the brass plaque in front is not making it actually historic?
It's, I think it's, as I recall on the list, it's on a centennial house list, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's on the register. Or the website could be out of date. It was a few years old. The information on the website is a few years old.
Other disclosures? Ozma?
I have nothing to disclose.
David?
Yes, I visited the site and looked through around the corner and tried to determine about the historic nature of the neighboring building, and noted the fact that there are no windows on a property line side and that there's an areaway on the property line side. It's unfortunate my cleaners are in the building that will be demolished, so.
Okay.
So anyhow.
I also visited the site and was wondering about the historic building as well. Okay then, staff?
Yes, thank you. Sheldon Ossing, contract planner. I have a presentation. The applicant is here as well with their presentation. So this is a preliminary review, and we're seeking some input from the board regarding their concept. We have noted a couple of things that are not compliant with the code. So again, we're just seeking some feedback on how the project can be consistent with the required findings and provide any input regarding certain areas that I will bring up in the report. But the area is 0.12 acre site, very small in a very urbanized area. An area that I think is probably in transition. You have buildings that are single-story, 2-story, 3-story, 4-story. There's kind of a high-rise building that's on Cowper, mid-block. So there's a lot of different things that are going on. And I think a couple meetings ago, at least, there was another project down on Hamilton that recently is recommended for approval from this board. So there's a lot that's happening along and in this area. So the site is 5,000, just over 5,000 square feet. It's zone CDC with the pedestrian overlay. It does include a 1-story commercial building. There are 3 tenants in it currently. So there is some consideration for preserving the retail space and the amount of square footage that's there. That's what's included in their project. The proposal is to construct a 4-story, nearly 12,000 square foot building that's just over the FAR. So we recognize that that would have to be actually reconciled. The project also proposes what is a 57-foot tall building. We know 50 feet is a height limit. The issue is with the stairwell access, and there's some options that they could do for that, creating a roof hatch, or the code does allow for like a rooftop garden, that it does allow for some exceptions to the height to have access there. So those have been communicated to the applicant for their consideration. The exterior of the building is more of a contemporary designed type of building. The corner really is that retail piece on the first floor as well as on the second floor. There's some office that's included in the building on the upper stories, and then the residential as well as on the upper stories. And there's some opportunities there with some balconies. In the renderings, they do show some landscaping, although officially in the plans, the landscaping is only considered deer grass, so we are looking to seek more types of actual vertical landscaping for the project. There's a lot of windows and fenestration along at least a couple of elevations. Of course, the south side, as mentioned, is pretty much blank. On the first floor, you do include those bifolding nano walls, and that's something that the applicant is really keen on, having that very open type of retail environment. Since the project, that first floor is set back a bit, it does include more of a kind of open outdoor space for perhaps gathering or putting outdoor furniture there. There is a mesh kind of railing system that's used throughout the project, as well as the gate for the entry into the garage. The project does include a puzzle lift system that is partially below ground and partially above ground. So you would enter the garage, and then you have some surface spaces that are on the left side that include your accessible spaces and charging spaces. And then you turn to the right, and that's where your machine is. You would go in there, and the machine would take you, once you get out of the car, take you either below ground or above ground. And there's a cross-section that shows that on the slide here. So the project will need to address height. It will need to address the open space arrangement, as I mentioned. With respect to the parking, the number of parking spaces is accurate. However, retail spaces can't use the puzzle lift without the director of planning taking into consideration this could be a valet parking space or parking operation, or that the applicant could request a reduction in amount of parking spaces through a transportation demand management program, which is a requirement anyway. So there are a couple of options that they could do to address that. And as I mentioned, floor area is over. The interesting thing about this zoning district, covered parking for non-residential is actually included in FAR. In other parts of the city, it's not, but in this district it is. So that was kind of a penalty here for them, and they have to address that. We are seeking some comments from the board regarding the scale and mass. This project would be probably one of the larger ones that is there now. And before I started my presentation, did mention that there's that kind of older building that's adjacent to the project. So is there justification to have a 50-foot building right next to that? And then segue into the design in a neighborhood context. Is this appropriately designed? There's kind of a mixture of traditional architecture, some newer building along Cowper. It's a 4-story building, but that one has a lot more like variety and setback, but it's also not next to kind of a shorter building. And there's other areas of interest by the board that may come up regarding their proposal. So with that, I recommend that the board review and provide comments. No formal action is requested at this time. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheldon. Any questions of staff? David?
Yes, Sheldon, so you mentioned the parking issue. I'm not quite clear why we would go that route rather than suggest that they take care of all the parking in a cellar area, which is not recommended here. Could you explain?
That is also an option. I think I did speak with the applicant. They would be exploring a kind of basement. The issue here is not a whole lot of space to have like a ramp, so they probably would have to inquire about doing an elevator to get down a level. So that's an option for them to look at.
You're saying it couldn't be ramped?
I think there could be a challenge in doing that given the dimensions and the size of the property.
Did they ever create a scheme showing you that it's not possible?
Not this time, but we would recommend that they do that. I think we need we should explore that, absolutely.
Okay.
Sheldon, could you address the question of the retail preservation ordinance and how it affects this property?
So whatever retail or retail-like square footage is on the property now, they need to replace that in kind. So that's part of the challenge for this site is they're doing that in 2 levels. So I think some opinion would be, well, the first level is great. That has a lot of openness and that makes sense. There's a lot of pedestrian activity. How does that work in a second floor? So that's something we have to address.
Does the code offer a definition of retail space?
It does, yes, it's pretty clear.
And that definition is?
I'll have to look that up.
So we'll come back to you on that. I think that affects how the second floor space is considered in affecting the design. Okay, with that, the applicant, would you care to address your project to us? You'll have 10 minutes to speak. If you could state and spell your name for the record, we'd appreciate that.
Good morning, board members. My name is Khoi Lei, first name Khoi, Khoi, last name Lei, L-E. And I'm actually the architect. The applicant has been traveling, so I'm here in his place here. I just want to thank you for having us here, and I just want to briefly go over this project here. So just to give you some context, so on the upper right-hand corner, that's Cowper there, and then the street that is coming down this way, that's Hamilton there. And then on the existing property, there's actually 4 retail spaces. One, I believe, is vacant. One is a restaurant. One is your cleaner. And then the other one, I think they sell plants or something like that. I think roughly total square footage of that is roughly about 2,400 square feet. And then the remaining part of the property is probably 8 on-grade parking stalls, completely open. There's no existing trees on the site. There are 5 beautiful street trees that we love to save and keep. Love trees. In terms of the setbacks and whatnot, there's actually no commercial setbacks, front, side, or rear, but there is a setback for the residential. Opposite of Culper, I think there's a 10-foot setback. So that's why you see some of our plans stepping back here. I think Sheldon went over the stats of this. Let's see. The property, as you know, it's 5,375 square feet. Total FAR could be 10,750 square feet. I think we provided 22 parking stalls, and as Sheldon reminded, we're slightly over the FAR, and I'll discuss the parking shortly. This slide here shows you the basement of the parking lift system that we're trying to put in here. So we do need a basement here so that 2 cars can go down. So the system that we're trying to put in here is 3 up and 2 down. And if we go through the floor plans right here, on the right-hand side of the page, that's where the retail is. And fronting the retail, we have this large landscape area. And this is where Sheldon was talking about having open spaces. Can't see my mouse, but here, see, these are nano doors from here to here. So what we had intended was that since this is a pedestrian area, a lot of people would be walking back and forth here. We just want to make this space a lot more inviting than anything else. So we want to create a huge, wide opening, have nano doors just completely open to here. And we're envisioning some sort of retail, like an art gallery or something like that, so that, as you mentioned before, the weather here is super nice. I mean, there's probably 2 days out of the year where you need AC, and the rest of the days you can just leave it completely open, and people can meander from the street, through the landscape areas, and into the retail space. And what we had envisioned for this landscape area was pavers and maybe grass in between, so it's a lot more inviting, but we'll work with the landscape architect to maybe have a little bit more, maybe, I don't know, lavender or something like that. I love the idea of lavender, so that when you walk by the lavender, it brushes up against you, and the smells of the lavender just wafts into your nose and whatnot. Going on to the left-hand side of the page, you see the entrance right there, the elevator and the stairs. We do have some electrical rooms. We work with the building department to place these fire control rooms and the electrical rooms, and also the trash enclosures off to this side here. This is the commercial trash enclosures for the retail and the office space there. And then this area is where the parking is. This is the Parks Plus lift system. As I mentioned before, it's 2 down and 3 up, the drive aisle, and then we have 2 non-mechanical parking spaces that are required for this property here, and then 2 ADA stalls. So if we go to so just walking through this next level, this is level 2. We do have retail up on this level. Our initial plan was that the 2 levels would be 1 occupant, and then we'd have some sort of stairs connecting these 2. we're hoping that someone would just come in and just lease out the whole 2 levels, and I think that'd be very beneficial for the project if they do that there. And then off to the other side, we have the 1 residential unit, and this space here is for the lift system for the 3 cars to go up there. And then we do have some trash enclosures for the residential only right near the elevator there. So the residences would come down, drop off their trash there, and then I believe that the applicant will have a management company take the trash down to the street. And we talked to the building department about that, and they're okay with that. And up on the 3rd level, we have the office space here, and also some residential off to the left-hand side there. That residential is going to be great because they have this huge balcony here with a nice planter here. I think it's going to be a pretty decent unit there. And these units, they're not big. They're 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. They're roughly about 1,000 square feet. And usually the other units that we design, they're a lot bigger, but this is great. They're small, compact. And up on the 4th level, we have 2 other units up here. Here's 1 unit here with a nice balcony here, and here's another unit to the right-hand side with its own dedicated balcony here. And if you notice, these things do step back from the street. As Sheldon mentioned earlier, the retail on the 1st level steps back quite a bit, probably 10 to 15 feet from the street frontage, give it a little bit more inviting feeling. You'll see it more clearly when we show the rendering here. And then it does step back up again at this level too, so it's not right up against the street. On this level, the 3rd level, there's a balcony, and then the building is stepped back. And then we step it back again, so that it's not just a wall of windows on the street there. And then up on the rooftop, we have to check with the building codes. We may be able to eliminate that stairs so that we don't violate the 50-foot height restriction. So we put all the AC units, the mechanical units up here. And when we read the building codes, I think you're supposed to provide a stairs, but we're going to see if we can get away with a ship's ladder or something like that. And then the AC units, what we're trying to do is to shield it visually and, for noise and whatnot from all the neighbors. We're going to put some screens, maybe a 6-foot screen or something like that. I think it would be beneficial for the community if we do that. So there's other buildings around there, maybe a little bit taller, they can look down, and we don't want them to see all the AC equipment there. This slide just shows you the context of the neighborhood. This next slide also shows you the before and after. Here's the before here, and this is the after here. One of the design inspirations that we had is for this property is if you look at the Wells Fargo building, it's not clearly shown on here, but they have a lot of horizontals coming on. So we wanted to pick that up. We didn't want the design to be so foreign to the neighborhood. We wanted to pick up some cues from the neighborhood, but we wanted to extend some of those horizontals onto our building. Initially, we wanted the building to be more of a gray tone. The applicant wanted the color to be more of a gray tone, but when we worked with staff and Sheldon, they said, no, it's too dark. So we changed it to a more neutral color that is much better suited to the neighborhood. Here's another shot of, I think this is from Cowper looking north there. It is quite, the stairwell is dominant on that. We will try to address some of the blankness of that south wall there. And one of the things that we did have in mind was that it's pretty difficult because on the south wall, it's right on the property line. It needs to be a 2-hour wall. So we'll talk to our code consultant to see if we can put any fenestrations or anything wire glass. I don't know if that's possible, but we'll explore that option there. Or maybe put a mural up on there just to make it look a lot better from the Cowper perspective. So this is the site context with the building there. And this is, I believe, from Cowper. And this shows you how the building steps back, incrementally from the street. And this is the lift system that we're proposing, 2 down, 3 up. And this here, you can see how it steps back from the street here, especially the corner here, how open it feels and whatnot. So it steps back, it gives a little bit of shade, a little bit more inviting, and then you can see the horizontals almost extending towards, the Wells Fargo building and whatnot. And this is looking east here. This is the parking entrance here, and that's a retail. That's some more retail and some office up there. And then see how it's just wedding cakes down here. We'd love to wedding cake it even more. We're looking at that. But this concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions for the applicant? Staff, do we have a definition of retail? We'd asked for that a second ago.
Yeah, so in terms of retail, there's your very general type of retail, and then you have your personal services as well, like your salons and your studios and like martial arts studios, things like that. So the preservation ordinance is for ground floor. So the project does have all of its current retail on the ground floor, so that needs to be replaced. And what the project is doing is that they are proposing part of that to be on the ground floor and then part of it to be on the second floor.
So is it staff's opinion that second floor retail meets the requirements of the retail preservation ordinance?
That subject is still under discussion.
Thank you, Jody. Okay, any other questions? Okay, the applicant can have a seat. Alex, why don't you start us discussing?
Great, thank you for your presentation, and thanks for doing a preliminary hearing on this one. So I do want to acknowledge the challenges of having a small site, right? You only have 43 feet. Typically the lots downtown were on 25-foot modules, so it would be like 50 feet, but then we did the street widening, right? So that took out 7 feet, and that leaves you with like 43 feet, which is not a lot to work with for a mixed-use building. So I definitely do want to acknowledge the challenges of that. Generally, I'm supportive of the design that you've done. I think you've done some pretty ingenious things in trying to maximize the amount of usable square footage and minimize the number of stairs to the residential units. I think that's all good. And I do appreciate the open corner retail and then the setback on the first 2 floors for the retail. I think that's a good idea. And I also do support you're trying to break the massing from the lower 2 floors versus the wedding cake tiered 3rd and 4th floor. So I do support all of that. So I am sort of mindful, though, of 429 University, which is a recently approved project that took many, many years. And it had issues with a modern design in proximity to the old Victorian houses on Kipling Street. And so I think that could be an issue on this project as well. I think my suggestion for consideration would be to consider 610 Cowper, which is across the street from your project. It was designed by Hayes Group, and that's a modern mixed-use building. But the materials, they've got, I think, 3 or 4 different materials on there. They've got terracotta, pigmented reinforced concrete, and also aluminum metal panels. And again, like your project, they broke the mass between the bottom 2 floors and then the upper floors. And I'm thinking I think my recommendation would be to try to do more differentiation between your upper and lower levels. And that way the lower 2 floors can be related to the context, like there's the building across the sort of Mediterranean style building across the street, and it can have some sort of strong linkage there, and then the upper floor is more differentiated from the bottom floors. Also, too, I think consideration of like sun shading on the upper floors, I think, is important. Or if you're going to do it without sun shading and just relying on glass, I do want to see the glass, if it's like a very dark or reflective glass, to minimize the solar heat gain. I would like to see what you're thinking about on that. I have some reservations on the garbage location on Hamilton Avenue at grade. It's potentially, yeah, I'm not crazy about that, although I do realize that you don't have a lot of space. And then also, when I look at like your parking situation, the parking garage area, when I see similar buildings in San Francisco, I'm a little worried about all of if I'm just walking by and it's like an open, some sort of relatively open mesh, that I'm going to see all of if there's like spray foam insulation on the ceiling and exposed plumbing and all the lights, and usually all that stuff is very unattractive, and sometimes they're visible from the point of view of a passerby or a pedestrian. Some of the better buildings have a ceiling or drop ceiling or some sort of soffit, or that the driveway gate and any openings are more solid, more like a perforated metal, more opaque, that provides more screening to the garage. And then I'm undecided on this, is the relationship of this project to 610 Cowper, which is the sort of Victorian building next door. So the way I look at it now, the landscaping is really is nice, and it provides the linkage between the two buildings. So I'm thinking that something that, in some way, that should continue, and it provides like a transition between Hamilton, which is more commercial, and Cowper, which is more of a mixed transitional kind of street. But the existing landscape character there is actually quite nice. And I do appreciate like what you're trying to do with setting back the staircase there. I think I get your intent, and I'm thinking I just want to see more detail on how that works. So I think that's where I am on your building. I'm curious to see what the other board members think about this project.
Before we continue, I realize that I neglected to open the meeting to public comment. I'd like to do so now. Is there any member of the public who'd like to comment on this project? Seeing and hearing no one, we'll continue our comments. Ozma?
Oh, sorry, excuse me. Just clarification from Board Member Liu. You mentioned early on about the example building on Cowper, and I think you meant maybe 619. There's a range of addresses, but it said recognizable building. I think we know what you're talking about, not 610, though.
I looked it up last night. I think it was 611.
Yeah, okay, that'll work.
611. 610 is the one next door. Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, Ozma?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Where do I begin? I do appreciate what you were saying about having an open corner at the retail level, and I think that is really well done here. I would like to see that openness translated more through the building, and I don't know how much you were here for the previous hearing, and I'm trying to remember if I added operable windows as one of the conditions for the last one. Darn it, I didn't. Darn it. Well, hopefully they still do it. But for residential, operable windows are really, really, really important. And even for office space, I believe they're very important. And I know that the aesthetic of an operable window is not this sort of glossy, flat surface that it looks like you're trying to go for in your rendering. But that's also one of my other concerns about this design is that it has the massing and the articulation is not enough. It feels very blank and flat, and there isn't enough relief in the elevation or facade. Just going through your elevations, I can understand a modern look, but there are ways to do that and provide more relief and more character to the building. At the moment, it's true, it's kind of reminding me a bit about 429 University, which I think actually had a bit more relief than this does at this moment. So I would encourage you to use things like operable windows, but even adding shading and things that will give you a bit more play in the facade. The other buildings in the context have a lot of character, and they have a lot of relief in the facade, and definitely not saying, match that architecture style to the T, but having detail, something smaller scale in the facade and the elevations is going to enrich your project. And even if the style's not the same, it'll still feel like it belongs in Palo Alto. I know you mentioned, it seems like you're already aware of the blank walls around. You've got one on this rendering that we're looking at right here. There's one on the other side. There's a lot of opportunity there to do something really interesting. So definitely don't ignore the blank walls. It's a huge problem. And it's a big part of your project. People are going to see it from far away. I do like how you've landscaped a lot of the tiers. I think that's really important, even if it's not. Please go ahead and reflect that in your landscaping plan. That's really important that this is a part of your project. Where the car stacker is, I have a huge concern of the street frontage there. I'm trying to think of how to address it. Obviously, we can't treat it like retail. We can't make it kind of shiny and glossy, but maybe there's, and I'm kind of want to talk, or maybe have some back and forth with board member Lou later, or my other board members, but if your car stacker is going to be there, right now you're covering it all up, maybe it'd be great to showcase it and to let people on the street see exactly what this crazy cool contraption is, and then that will make that facade a little less dull and a little bit more pedestrian friendly. Just a note on the renderings, the railings that you have shown right here don't seem to be very high quality, so I would encourage you to use something a bit more higher quality for that. Cool elevations, stacker. I do like your partie diagram about the horizontals grabbing from the neighbor, and so I'd encourage you to keep exploring that, but there's ways to do that, and kind of maybe you have a bit more overhang on one side, maybe you have sort of these plates that float and everything else is sort of inset and inside it. At the moment, it is reading a bit more flatter than it is like striated. So I'd encourage you to keep pursuing that. Operable windows shading. Okay, I'm good. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
So you want operable windows, huh?
And shading.
Okay, David.
Thank you for the project. Gives us a lot of thinking to do here. I guess my first concern, which I mentioned to Sheldon, was that I'm bothered by the parking end of the building. It is abrupt on the street and isn't a really great facade to pass by while you're walking along that street. So that in juxtaposition to the wonderful openness at the other end, it's not a very friendly facade on the ground floor. And I can't help but think that the problem really is the parking itself, and that somehow if there were another way to do it, below grade, you could do a tremendous improvement for the project as well. So I hope you and city planning will explore that possibility and come back to us with a scheme that really works in a better way, both for the street environment and for the parking scheme. I hope it isn't a situation where this is the only way you can do it. But you'll have to work on that one. The openness of the corner is quite something. It also forces you to then put the elevator entry quite deep into the building. That's sort of also problematic for me because the entry isn't all that great to the upstairs areas. And I'm wondering why, if there's a retail on the ground floor and the second floor and they're connected, why they couldn't also have an elevator connection, and therefore you'd have a more private elevator for all of the residences. That seems to me to make a lot of sense. Then I wouldn't mind, I think, going to the back of the building. You could make it personal for those people who enter, and maybe their lobby would be a little sooner, and the mailboxes, et cetera. All of those things that relate to the residential upstairs could be part of a personal lobby for those people who come into that building. I want to emphasize what Alex said about the building around the corner. I think it's a very pretty, very well-designed building. I'm very impressed with it, in fact, and go back and look at the materials and how they've detailed it. But I'm not sure it applies equally here, because your reaction to your neighboring building on Hamilton is probably more appropriate in some way. So I wouldn't suggest that you necessarily change materials in that manner. Your kind of format of forms is, to me, could be successful next time around. I don't see why it's necessary to make such a drastic change in color. I mean, it's a sort of a dominant building, the bank building next door, in color, and really establishes a feeling to that block. So some kind of a precast, rather than brick, of course, that would match in color tone to some of that building, I think would be a much more successful kind of repetition on that block, and unify it in some way, because you really are kind of repeating the stepping qualities of that building. It doesn't have to look exactly like it, but there are some similarities in color I think would be a pleasant thing for the whole town here. The garbage right on the street isn't great. So if you solve the parking problem in some way, maybe you could get that off of the street, and then which means you might not have to have such severe kind of metal grills facing onto the street directly, and perhaps even some landscaping at the beginning of the block as well. Some possibility of that. And I also don't like the garbage on that upper floor. Hate to tell you, but garbage smells, and come out to a lobby in which you have a residential unit and other people's garbage isn't a great idea. So if you solve the garbage down below, maybe they'd have to walk it over there it's not a long walk, to some other area where you could keep it away from both the street and from the residences. I'm confused about the zoning here, Sheldon. I'm concerned about, the fact that we have just a few units in buildings, major buildings like this. And I just don't understand why the city really allows that sort of thing here. It seems to me it's a commercial building, a good location for a commercial building, and I don't understand, is this sofa, and that's the way it's laid out, sofa? No?
No, I mean, this is just the applicant's proposal.
Just his proposal. Well, okay. Maybe it's
Dave,
acceptable.
could you clarify what about the zoning that you don't, what do you not like about the zoning?
I just
Is
don't,
the mixed use?
I just don't see a mixed use with just a few units of housing. It bothers me, you know.
So historically, downtown residential was not allowed for many years. And then in one of the updates, I forgot exactly when, in the 2000s, the mixed use provision was added in. And then staff maybe can correct me, is it I'm mixing up some of the zoning. Is it 1.0 floor area for commercial and 1.0 for residential? Yeah. So that was a zoning change that was made to add, previously it was like if you wanted to do mixed use, it was very difficult. And so we've opened the door to allow it. And then maybe does this, and then in some cases we were just getting the penthouses, the luxury, the 5,000 square foot penthouses. And so we've been tinkering with it. So if you have a recommendation, I think everybody's open to suggestions, but it's something that's been in the works for a while, and we're still modifying it as we go along.
Well, I think when you're building a new building like this, and the kind of expensive kind of construction that it takes for a commercial building like this, you can't help but inflate the price you charge for all the residential. So here we are making a distinction, class distinction downtown of the people who are going to be able to afford to live in this building. And that's all I'm going to say about that at the moment. On the other hand, if you're going to do it, I think the comments that have been made here are very good ones, that the scale ought to change from a commercial-looking building into a residential commercial combination. And there are a number of ways you should be doing that, and one of them is screening, which a different kind of, another one might be changing the window bays and the format for where it turns residential so it really begins to look more like a residence. But I want to also say that it's Palo Alto and the air is great, and why not have windows that open? And there's another way to change a facade, that a commercial maybe ought to have, I think. Retail ought to have some operable windows. That's my opinion, just an opinion. But certainly residential has to have it, so you really need to create another format for looking at the residential portion of this building. Scale, change of the windows, floor to ceiling in some way, reflect the functions inside a little differently on the outside. I don't see that seems to be happening here yet. On the other hand, I like the massing, so how to create the residential feel with the massing kind of staying the same way, somewhat the same, whatever you need to do. So I sort of see this as a preliminary, as a presentation to us, and therefore you've got a lot of fun ahead of you to develop it. But I want to say one other thing is don't give up on using your nice renderings on the cover of a drawing sheet like this. Don't leave them in the back of the book. It's nice to look at a picture like the drawings when you see, oh, there's the building. Okay, so now we can cut it to pieces. But at least we have this pretty picture to look at on the front. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, David, Osman, Alex. I think you've done some fine architecture here, and parts of this building are really exciting. The two-story open corner on Cowper and Hamilton is really neat. That said, however, I see two real significant concerns I have, and they're really not even, I don't know what you can do about them as an architect, but one is the parking. I just think that the stacking lift you have has too great an impact on both the facade on Hamilton and on your floor plan layout. You really can't use the second floor as well because you've got these parking lifts here. And you're really in a bind. I'm scratching my head about this project because I'm not sure it's viable the way you have it. I think you need below-grade parking. I don't think you can fit a ramp on the site. And I don't know how to reconcile those differing facts. So The other day I was thinking maybe you could get some kind of an elevator lift that just takes cars down. I believe that would even solve your ADA requirement. As long as you have an elevator, cars can be below it. And then maybe you could make the whole thing work with a fraction of the amount of space on Hamilton just to get into that elevator lift and get down. You could have enough parking in 1 or 2 floors below. I think then the whole thing would shake free. But the way it is now with the parking alone, I could not support this project. And I don't see how you could change it. With the parking requirements you have almost 60%, 61% by my calculation of the facade along Hamilton is dedicated to a parking garage, basically. And right now what we have is an open parking lot, but 4 shops that are known and loved and used. And the idea is to make it better, not worse. And I just don't see that happening. I don't see it happening because of the parking. The retail you can do, you do wonderfully. My second concern, and this I'll address to my colleagues, that the building is too tall. At 4 stories, 50 feet, every bit of 50 feet, plus mechanical and elevator and stuff, adjacent to a 2-story historic building that's not going to go away. I just don't see that working. I think that it just doesn't fit the massing of the area. All the renderings I look at, even against the Wells Fargo building, which is massive, but somehow doesn't look as tall. So I remind my colleagues of 203 Forest Avenue. It's a building we looked at a number of years ago with a very similar 3rd and 4th floor with ribbons of glazing like this. And that project was ultimately denied and went back on appeal and was still denied. It did not succeed. And it was in a similar type of neighborhood, a different zoning district perhaps, but I think the same arguments apply. And you will not have my support on a building of this size. So I want to be very clear about that to you. Hopefully, you could reconfigure the parking, gain more massing of the building on 3 floors and make it work. What I find looking at this image on the screen, for example, is that the bottom 2 floors are quite handsome. It will fit in very well. And if you had a 3rd floor of residential on top of that, that would really work. That would fit in well. But those are big changes, big things on planning. And so I just want to be very clear how I feel about it. We'll poll the rest of my colleagues regarding the height because it's a very important issue in town. I share the other comments my colleagues made. Alex's reference to the Ken Hayes design building across the street is wonderful. Not for the massing, perhaps, or the cleverness of the design, but just the way they used a terracotta cladding to connect the building to the other somewhat terracotta-flavored buildings on the corners. I find tremendously successful. It's very sophisticated and cleverly done. It's still a very contemporary building, but something about it just fits. I compare that to the building at 626 Waverly, which is a concrete box, which just doesn't fit. The material alone is what really doesn't work. Alex is very carefully pointing that out to you. I think that's really worth being mindful of. Osmo was talking about the ribbons of windows up on the 3rd and 4th floor, and I think she's dead on that. They don't really, they're just too much. It's too massive, too commercial looking. Maybe what David was mentioning, which is that you have residences up there, so maybe design them differently, make it look residential. And it's just not. Right now it's too sort of San Francisco commercial, to use a pejorative term. And it just needs more variation, deviation. I agree that the horizontal lines are attractive and appropriate, but maybe just too much so with the windows. And I agree with many of the smaller comments about the trash can locations, idea of linking the landscaping together, but maybe not to beat that to death too much. I think the biggest issues here is the height of the building and the way you're dealing with the parking. Let me throw out the last thing is, for me at least, to have a 2-story retail space, I would reference back other retail spaces in downtown that do that successfully. The Restoration Hardware, I think, a new one, which has a lower level retail space. And it works because integrated within the storefront is that staircase and elevator to get up and down. If we remember the old Z Gallery, where the Apple Store is now, that had a big staircase sort of in the middle at the back. It was a grand internal staircase going up. The same with the old Toy and Sport Warehouse. In both cases, the staircase was an integral part of the store, and therefore you could easily say that the second level was retail combining with it. I think you need to do something like that to convince, both to make it function, but also to convince us that you're replacing retail. Right now, what you've created is another office space. And in spite of what any of us say or do, that's how it will end up being used, I believe. And I'd like to see you put in a circular element right in the middle, some grand staircase inside or outside, but some effort to integrate the spaces in order to claim that it's, to show to us that it's a better retail present than what you have now. To my colleagues, I'd like to hear us address the question of the height of the building. Who wants to take a look at that?
Peter, I just wanted to make one correction. I think you had mentioned restoration hardware, but I think you meant design within reach.
Absolutely, you're right. I mix the two up constantly. Yeah, restoration hardware is going over to stamp. They couldn't be more different, yes. Design within reach on University Avenue. The height of the building. Any other opinions?
Well, for me, it's a design issue. So the zoning is 50 feet maximum, and if you can design it really well, then it's potentially approvable, right? But it hinges on the design. And so I think I understand, from your perspective about cutting off a floor, I do see that when I look at one of the renderings along Hamilton. I think there, maybe reference a sheet. It's
To the applicant, are you able to pull up, or Sheldon, some of the images showing the building in context? No.
yeah, there's one. Let me get them. Okay, at least for me, on sheet A104.
Let's get that image up, Alex.
The image on the bottom.
That's it, yes.
To me is an issue, but when I look at the upper images, to me then it's just a design issue. Like the floor does not bother me in the upper two images.
And how about the upper left? Isn't that the view coming along?
Cowper.
Yeah, right there on the left,
well,
coming
and
into
then
Cowper.
on that case, I think the issue is the stair tower, and the stair tower, the blank stair tower issue came up on 429 University. Several times, and several different options were presented for the stair tower. It changed several times, and I think that the alternatives were better. I don't recall at the end of the day if we actually ended up with the best version of it, but it seems to me there's lots of room for improvement on that corner.
Your thoughts, Ozma?
I'm okay with the height, actually. In general, if the zoning code allows it, I don't see a problem with it. In context, it's true the adjacent buildings are lower, but we have a few situations in Palo Alto where we have just tall buildings in a sea of low buildings. So I think Board Member Liu is correct that it is certainly a design issue, that it looks this massive and that it feels this daunting, but if there's a way to, use easy design techniques to sort of mitigate that height, I would be fine with the height.
Any thoughts, David?
Well, I think we should leave it, in this case, with the architects to work out something that's appropriate for the top of the building, the top 2 floors. I think if zoning allows it, I would accept it, but it really does require a redesign at a different scale on the top of the building. And I think it could be successfully done, but I don't think it could be done in the same idiom as the rest of the building. The ground 2 floors of the building are pretty strong architecturally, and I think the top of it could be made to work. Might be different materials, would be different kind of window bays and window layout, even recesses and some balconies on the front as well. But it would, a redesign, I think, where it fills up the mass in a different way and divides it up in a different way could be successful. And I would say, I would allow it to go forward with a design of the top of the building different than what it is. And let us take a look at that. And the bottom of the building with the parking. Those are the two areas I'd be concerned about.
Thank you. Allow me to temper my comments then that I would be open to a fourth floor building if the design really worked. So I don't want to categorically rule it out, and that would be inappropriate. But I remain very concerned about how that's possible. Any other comments from us or to the applicant? Do you have any questions, or how well do you understand what we're saying? Please come to the microphone. Tell
I
us.
just want to clarify a few things. Thank you for the comments, first of all.
Speak into the microphone so we can hear.
Thank you for the comments. Greatly appreciate those comments. They're very constructive. In terms of, if we take just the bottom 2 floors and just make all them commercial, like move the office down to the 2nd floor, and then put all the residential on the 3rd and 4th floor, would that work out? And the reason why the building is so tall is because of the lift system. So we have an option. We just talked about it yesterday, taking the lift system and putting it underground, which will help everyone here. And then we can just fill in that space and make all the floor-to-floors on the commercial levels a little bit lower, and then we can bring the whole massing down. I totally agree with you on all the massing. The massing is dictated on the car lift system. That's the reason. I think we have another solution to bring it down.
Well, I don't think any of us want to answer that question.
Okay.
It's very much a design issue.
No.
I was going to say, it depends on how you design it.
But I do want to say to you that taking the puzzle lifts strictly underground does affect the massing. It doesn't help your street frontage issue. You still need the ADA spaces at surface level then.
Yes.
So a chunk of the concern we have is not solved by that.
Yes.
Be mindful of that, please.
Got it.
Any other issues you want to question? No. Anything else from the board members? Alex?
Peter, you had talked about like an elevator lift for the cars, for like an underground car parking. And I just wanted to point out to the applicant that we do have one project, mixed-use project downtown that uses an elevator. It's on the corner, it's on the University Circle. But it doesn't have retail, it's just office and residential above. So I would just throw that out there. I'm not as opposed to the parking as I think as you are, but there are other options.
I don't want to sound categorical. If you design it right, it's possible you could pull off having 60% of the frontage facing with the parking lot. What I do want to do, though, is try to not keep earning us this position of being seen as being difficult.
Yes.
I want to really be sure you understand that's a significant design concern. If I were the architect, I would be going back to my clients saying, I don't think this is going to work. Maybe, give us 100 hours, maybe we'll spin something out. Maybe these guys will be convinced, but it's not likely. You're taking a very difficult design challenge. And I just really want to be sure you hear that clearly from the board. That's why I'm polling everybody back and forth on it, because so many times we don't give you really clear feedback.
Understood.
I think you need to hear that very clearly. You might consider going back to the city and saying, look, I can deal with the residential parking just fine. This business of retail parking is too hard to work. So either I'm going to lose more retail frontage, or I can't have retail parking. And let that go up to city council as a zoning change of some kind. And play the political game and push for what you think is really the best building. Maybe a little bit harder, but in a little bit you're caught in the crosshairs of conflicting zoning requirements, as are we, as is staff. And all of us can imagine a better way to do it, so you're the applicant, make it happen. That's my advice to you on a personal level. Any other comments from us, from staff, anybody? Okay, thank you for that item. We'll move right along then. Study session, I don't think we have anything to go over. Approval of minutes. What minutes do we have, staff?
We didn't have a July 4th meeting, so no minutes.
No minutes, thank you very much. Before we get to the subcommittee, did we have that letter, the draft letter, to pass out? So to my colleagues, we have a letter we'd like to send off to the City Council. It's our annual report. We've all collaborated on it. Jody will be handing out a paper copy of where it stands now. We're going to put this on the agenda for the next hearing and formally go through any changes and hopefully vote on it and get it off our docket. So this is just a paper copy of that thing. It's not part of our agenda. We're not going to discuss it today, but just so everybody has a copy of it. Okay, with that, our meeting is adjourned and we'll go to the subcommittee.
Who's on subcommittee?
Alex and myself will be in the subcommittee.
Okay.
Thank you.